Hello everyone, my name is Braden, this is Airless Quill 9, and in today's video we're going to take a look at how to create a creature. So this is going to be a video in which I take a look at the multiple ways in which you can create a creature in 5th edition. And there are a few techniques that we can use to do so. I'm also going to show examples of how I use these particular techniques to create some of my own monsters that you can also use if you wish in your games. And I'm also going to just take a brief look at how you can use these rules yourself to create the monsters that you wish. So let's get into the specifics. So there are currently two ways to make a creature. There are the rules presented to us in the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide. And there are the new rules that are presented to us in the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. And both of these rules are different in a variety of ways. So we're going to take a look at each one and the ways that you can use these rules to create the monster that you are looking for. So how do we create a creature with the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide? Well, there are two ways that we can use these particular rules. The first one involves us modifying a creature, and the second way involves us making a creature entirely from scratch. So, option one for modifying a monster. This is the easiest option available to us with these rules. All it requires us to do is make small tweaks to an existing stat block. Most of the time, it doesn't require us to recalculate the CR unless we do something greatly altering the stat block. And this will give us a small variety to existing creatures that are in the monster manual or any other source that we are using to modify a monster. So some of the examples that they give us in this particular section of the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide is if you wanted to create a fiery phoenix, you could take the giant eagle or rock stat block, give it immunity to fire, and allow it to deal fire damage. And that would be good enough to make a fiery phoenix type creature. Or even creating something like a fire rock or a baby flying rock or fire rock for the giant eagle case. You could also take the baboon stat block, give it wings, and give it a flying speed to create a flying monkey. There are other ways that you could also modify stat blocks, and that's just changing the weapons that certain monsters have. This shouldn't change the damage potential greatly unless you're switching from a one-hand weapon to a two-handed weapon. Because if the stat block originally had a shield, giving it a bonus to AC, that could potentially change the challenge rating by itself. So do keep that in mind. You can also just add special traits to existing stat blocks, such as giving a goblin the spider climb trait to make it a spider goblin hybrid. You could give a troll 2 heads by giving it the 2 heads special trait. Or you can make a flying owlbear by taking the owlbear stat block and giving it the fly speed of a giant owl. So yeah, these are just small ways that you can use these these particular rules. And I'll show you an example of how I used this. So I took the stat block for a Yeti and I made a volcanic version of the Yeti called the Volcanic Yeti. And all I really did here was anywhere that I saw cold damage used, I switched it to fire damage. So the only changes that I really made to the Yeti stat block were I changed their damage immunity from cold to fire, fear of fire, the fear of fire trait, I changed to fear of cold, so it now deals with cold damage. Volcanic camouflage replaced snow camouflage, so it now functions in volcanic terrain instead of snowy terrain. And then Chilling Gray gaze, I renamed Burning Gaze and made it deal with fire damage. And then the claw attack, it dealt extra cold damage originally, and I just changed that to fire damage. So this was a very simple way to make a unique version of the Yeti that functioned around fire damage. So yeah, you can use these rules pretty easily. It probably took me maybe a minute and a half to come up with a concept and then just replace what I needed in this particular stat block to function the way I wanted. So yeah, this was a very easy way. And if you wanted to, you could also create an abominable version of this Volcanic Yeti. Just follow the exact same process I did here. But yeah, this was a very simple way to do this. So as for the second option available in 2014, creating a monster, this requires a much more hands-on approach. It is a lot more difficult to do because you are taking these rules in the guide and coming up with a homebrew monster, which means you have to calculate the challenge rating of it by yourself. It's not a perfect process because we do not have the way that every single trait in Dungeons and Dragons affects challenge rating. There is a list in the Dungeon Master's Guide in 2014 that helps us do that. But if you create an entirely homebrew trait that does something that is not accounted for here, that could affect your challenge rating without you really knowing it. So it's not a perfect process. There are some missing steps to it, but the 20 steps that it does provide us does work in a simple fashion. And you can use these rules to make a homebrew creature, such as the one that I created here. So the one that I made here particularly is the Pontianak, which is based off of a Native American folklore tale. It's a undead creature that is birthed from a pregnant woman dying by some horrible fate. So here I created a medium undead shape changer. I gave it a armor class and hit points, and I chose stats and saving throws and skills and damage resistances, immunities, and condition immunities. And I made sure to keep track of how all these affected the particular challenge rating. And then you have to function in how much damage the stat block deals. So I gave this creature a multi-attack option. It makes a bite attack and 2 claw attacks. And I also had to function in that the bite attack gives the Pontianak temporary hit points equal to the necrotic damage dealt. So that also modifies the hit point potential. So there's a lot of things going on in this particular stat block. And I'm not positive this actually comes out to a challenge rating 7, but based on the calculations I did, that's what I figured it would come out to. So this may be wrong, and it's hard to say for certain with the rules that we are presented, but I did create a unique creature, and yeah, this is a very interesting monster that I could use in a future game if I wished. So yeah, a lot of interesting, you can use these rules to come up with some interesting ideas, but I don't know how effective they are particularly based on what I was able to come up with here. But it does look nice, and it does look kind of official, at least as official as possible. So the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide just came out within the last couple months. And there are rules in here for how to create a monster, but they are not as in-depth as the 2014 rules. So we're going to talk about them. And it is a little disappointing that they are not as broad as the 2014 rules, because the 2014 rules really allowed you to create a homebrew monster. But then again, challenge rating was really difficult to calculate with these tools. So let's really talk about there's two ways that they talk about how to create a monster. So let's discuss them. So there are two steps that you can use in the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide to alter and create a creature. So you can give a existing stat block minor alterations, and you can give a stat block unique traits. So for these minor alterations, we are looking to change superficial details of existing monster stat blocks. This doesn't impact the functionality of the stat block itself. It just modifies it in certain ways. As you can see here, there are 8 options available to you to do. It's very easy to use. It doesn't change the monster's challenge rating, and it takes a minimal amount of effort to do. So they talk about just changing the size and creature type. You can change the ability scores as long as you don't modify whatever ability score is calculating its hit points and its armor class and damage, attack and damage bonuses, because those can alter the challenge rating by doing so. You can also give a creature additional languages or add and remove the telepathy language option. You could also give a stat block additional proficiencies or give it expertise in existing proficiency. You can also swap a monster's saving throw proficiencies, or if it has none, you can give 1 or 2 saving throw proficiencies to a stat block. That won't affect the challenge rating at all. You can also give a creature a new sense, such as blind sight, dark vision, tremor sense, or true sight, because those don't affect challenge rating at all. As for spells, as long as a spell doesn't deal damage, well, no, I won't say that. You can replace any of the spells in an existing stat block with a different spell at the same level, but it advises you to avoid replacing a spell that deals damage with one that doesn't, and vice versa, because that will affect the challenge rating if you do that. As for altering attacks, you can freely change the damage type of an attack. That doesn't alter challenge rating. The example that it gives here is you can make a skeleton into an ice skeleton by just causing its attacks to deal cold damage, which makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you could do that. And then you can also give creature resistance or immunities that it doesn't have, as long as it's no more than 1 or 2 damage types, because that won't affect the challenge rating. So yeah, some really simple steps here to add minor alterations to a creature, and that's enough to create something interesting. But there's also the second step, and that's to add some unique traits. So this really works in changing a creature's nature, in a sense. There are 23 options in the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide presented here, but it does tell us that we could use any traits in the presented in the monster manual for certain creatures, as long as those don't do anything outside of what these particular traits do. Something very simple, like I'm thinking of imps have devil sight. You could easily put devil sight into a stat block without that affecting the challenge rating, because that's more of that's a non-damaging trait, and it doesn't change the functionality of the stat block more than giving it some unique option that's a minor modification to something it already has. Adding these traits is also very easy to do. You can just grab one and plop it into a stat block. It doesn't change the monster CR at all. It takes a minimum amount of effort to do, and the options that they present to you here in the 2024 24 Dungeon Master's Guide are pretty interesting. I mean, you could give a creature advantage on initiative rolls with the Battle Ready trait. You can give it advantage on saving throws to avoid or end the poison condition with the Poison Tolerant trait. You could give a creature the Slod Host trait, which when the creature dies, a hostile Slad tadpole bursts from its innards in the same space. And that's an additional creature that the party will have to deal with whenever they kill that particular monster. I mean, some really interesting ones here. I particularly also like Warrior's Wrath at the very bottom that gives the creature advantage on melee attack rolls against any bloodied creature. That's particularly potent, and I'm surprised that doesn't affect a challenge rating at all. But yeah, there's some really interesting options here. I like what the traits that are presented here, and I'm really interested to see where the new monster manual goes, just so we can figure out what additional traits that we might be able to drag and drop into stat blocks to give them some more variety. So I used both of these options in creating a 2024 monster. And I took a look at what stat blocks we currently have that are an eye into what will be present in the 2024 monster manual. So I took the 2024 version of the knight that is present in the what is it, the Scion of Elemental Evil adventure that's on D&D Beyond, and I modified it slightly with these rolls. So you can see here I created the Dark Knight. This is a medium or small humanoid of any evil alignment. It has the exact same AC, HP, speed, and ability scores and saving throw proficiencies as that stat block. I added in resistance to necrotic damage, was the only change I made on the left hand portion of the stat block, besides changing any alignment to any evil alignment, because that just made sense to me. On the right side of the stat block, I added in the Devil Sight and Disciple of the Nine Hells traits. I also added in Dark Vision to the stat block as well. So Devil Sight functions with that Dark Vision that I added in, and then Disciple of the Nine Hells lets a hostile imp disgorge in the same place of the knight when it dies. So I felt like that was a really appropriate trait to add to this infernal dark knight that I was creating. And then as for the attacks dealt radiant damage in the knight stat block, so I simply just changed those to necrotic damage. And yeah, now I have a evil version of a knight that is a servant of the hells. So yeah, you can use these rules to make an interesting stat block. As you can see here, I made a dark knight in service of a archdevil. So you can use these to create something interesting, and I feel like this is a nice version of an evil knight that I was able to make with these rules. So when we look at each of the options available to us, both 2014 and 2024, the 2014 rules give us a greater amount of freedom. It allows us to create unique creatures. However, the rules are incomplete. They are not perfect, and they can lead to unbalanced homebrew monsters. So it's not a perfect process, but there is a lot of good things there for you to use with those rules. Whereas in the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide, these are very easy rules to do. We never have to worry about challenge rating changing. We can also use these on the fly. So if you wanted to modify a stat block without even thinking about it, doing it on the go, it is very easy to use. You could just add a trait onto an existing stat block and not have to worry about anything else. So the only downside of the options presented in the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide is there's no room for unique homebrew creatures. You could take something, or you could take an existing stat block and completely rename it and just use those particular stats for a new creature. However, there aren't really any 2024 stat blocks out currently that allowed me to take that particular approach with these rules. So I wasn't able to test that out very well. But you could use them in this particular way. I mean, the best example I can think of is something that has been talked about quite a bit. Is that in Van Richten's guide, or Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, it is talked about in the book how in order to use the Bagman in your adventures, you could just take the troll stat block and apply some traits to it to make that into the Bagman. So you could easily do that in 2024. That's completely easy to do, and it does create a unique creature without you having to create a entire stat block of your own. But the 2024 rules do not allow you to calculate a entirely new creature without using a pre-made stat block. You can't create anything from scratch in 2024, which is a downside of that particular option available to us. So which one should you use for your particular game? Well, 2014 is obviously the best option for creating homebrew monsters, but you do have to be very careful about correctly calculating the challenge rating of your monsters. I know based on what I've heard that the 2024 monster manual challenge rating is going to be a lot more relevant now, because monsters are going to exemplify their challenge rating a lot more than 2014 monsters did. They are now designed to hit at that challenge rating a lot. So if you're not using those rules to be very careful when calculating a monster's challenge rating, it could be under or above the challenge rating that you calculate, and that is going to affect combat, which could have good or bad consequences depending on your game. And honestly, I think the 2024 rules are the best for making minor alterations and changes to monster stat blocks, particularly because it gives us some very clear ways to do it. And the traits options, the 23 traits that it gives us, are pretty unique, and you could modify those in very small ways to give some interesting variety. So I feel like 2024 is the best option for making minor alterations and changes to existing monster stat blocks. And then 2014 is going to be the best option if you want to create something entirely new, but you do have to be careful about calculating that challenge rating. And honestly, you could use both of these options, since these are both the best things in their respective fields. You could take both of the rules presented to you and create something really fun and unique. But yeah, you just really have to consider what you are wanting to do when you're creating a monster. There's the easy way to do it, and there's the more in-depth way to do it. But yeah, that's going to be it for this particular video. I didn't want to take too long talking about this, but I did want to show you at least both the ways that you can create a monster now in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, because with this 2024 rules revision, there are very simple ways to use these rules now, but they are not as in-depth as the older version. But we do know that WotC had a lot more of a hands-on approach with these 2024 books than they did in the original 2014 versions. So maybe this is what they want people to start doing, is just modify the stat blocks that they give. But it is a reduction of creativity in that particular aspect. Personally, I really enjoy creating my own stat blocks, and I have used the 2014 Monster Manual to create a lot of unique stat blocks. And yeah, just calculating the CR is the hardest part about doing that. It's really the only difficult part about creating your own stat blocks, because you can do it. It's just hard to see if it's the appropriate challenge rating that you're wanting to do. But you can use the aids presented to do so. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate your support. Please like and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more content like this. I will be talking about how to create other things in the future, so do keep an eye out for those videos. And we are going to be biding our time until the Monster Manual comes out, so we can take a more in-depth look of how this is going to affect Dungeons and Dragons in the future. But until that time, thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all in the next video. Have a great one. Bye.